There are so many ocean animals out there that have cool characteristics. They have personalities. They have these evolutionary attributes that make them really cool to look at and really cool to understand. And they have this ability to connect with us, with humans, and make us feel in a different sort of way, like just emotionally happy, sometimes sad, and sometimes they just connect with you when you don't realize it. And that's who we're going to talk to today. We're actually going to talk to Mark Leiren-Young, who is an author, a screenwriter, a playwright, a filmmaker, who's made a name for himself writing and doing videos and movies on orcas, on sharks, and now on octopuses. And we are going to talk to his new book, Octopus Ocean, on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a new book that Mark Leiren-Young has written. It's called Octopus Ocean. It is the geniuses of the deep. He talks about his connection to octopuses. He talks about not only his connection, but just to the ocean environment and to the animals that live in the ocean environment. He lives out in BC. He's got a very interesting connection to the orcas out in BC. He talks about that connection, and just like it's an emotional connection that not only he's had, but he said many people that he's met, and I've met too, who you see when people watch these orcas and see how phenomenal they are just by spotting them. It overtakes them with emotion, happiness, sadness, just this bewilderment of watching these orcas do their thing. And the stories that he has, you are going to want to watch. He teaches storytelling. He tells stories in such a magical way that I wanted you to be able to hear this. So here is the interview with Mark Leiren-Young, talking about Octopus Ocean and orcas and all these different animals and wonderful connection to these animals. Here's the interview. Enjoy, and I'll talk to you after. Hey, Mark, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about Octopus Ocean?
Absolutely.
Right on. I am looking forward to this. This has been a long time coming. You and I have been planning this for a while. You are a fellow podcaster. Skana is the podcast that I was actually a guest on, which was a lot of fun back. I think it was in the summer. Was it released? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in the summer. So that was a lot of fun. And so it's always nice to be able to interview another podcaster. So that was one of the reasons we had you on. But also, you are an author, and you have a new book out that we're going to talk about called Octopus Ocean. Love talking about octopus, and we love talking about the ocean in general. So we're going to talk about podcasting, we're talking about the ocean, we're talking about writing, talking about works for the ocean, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But before we get into all that fun stuff, Mark, why don't you just let the audience know who you are and what you do?
Wow. I am a writer. I write all sorts of different things. I'm never sure how. It's so funny because for the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, I feel like I should just say, yeah, I write lots of stuff about oceans.
Yeah.
Because I really do.
You do.
My life was taken over by orcas back in 2015, and they have not let up. And basically, it's like, yeah, I belong to J-Pod at this point. And but that turned into books about sharks, that turned into this new book about octopuses. I've got another book coming out next year that was the main reason I wanted to interview you, because it's all about how to protect the oceans, but for kids. And I'm going, I have to talk to you. You are the How to Protect the Ocean guy, and you are the only person who's not like a youth activist who I've currently quoted in the book. Assuming you make it past.
Well, thank you very much.
I was like, I have to quote the guy who runs the How to Protect the Oceans podcast in the How to Protect the Oceans for Kids book.
It's in the name. It kind of goes with the branding, right? I love that. It's a lot of fun when we talk to authors, because a lot of the authors that we've actually talked to come out with like textbooks. I had Dr. David Ebert on here a number of times. He's written, I think it was over 35 textbooks. We've had David Schiffman, which is a bit of a textbook and kind of everyday
also
kind
wonderful
of thing,
intro to sharks.
Yeah, exactly. A perfect one to sharks. So we've had a lot of people on that have different books on being activists and about climate change and growing up with climate change and all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot of fun. but it's a lot of fun when you have someone who's just dedicated and you've written multiple books on the ocean. So let's just start off right from the beginning. I want to get to know you a little bit. I want the audience to get to know you a little bit. Where did this passion for the ocean come from?
Wow. This is where my life gets totally confusing for most people. And because you're you, I'll give you more context than I normally give.
Please.
Yes, whales. Always whales. Because people now assume that I've got a background like you or David Schiffman or something, that I've got a background in, at the very least, a background in science.
Yes.
You know, I've got much more of a background in comedy. I've got much more of a background in theater. I've got a degree in theater and creative writing. I went to an event where I was speaking to the Marine Mammal Symposium at the University of British Columbia. And I went, I think I'm the only, not only do I think I was the only speaker who wasn't an ologist in a marine related profession, I was definitely the only person there with a Master of Fine Arts.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know, like 300 people there. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who studied theater.
Yeah, you're pretty positive.
I think it's a safe bet. So, weirdly, where my life took a very interesting left turn was I was writing for Maclean's magazine a jillion years ago.
Wow.
And I was writing a story for Maclean's on the never-ending battle at the time over cetaceans in captivity at the Vancouver Aquarium.
Mm-hmm.
And for any of the listeners who do not know this, Maclean's used to be a very, very, very big deal.
Oh, this was huge. It was like Time magazine for Canada, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was used to writing for regional publications. I'd written for a lot of stuff in BC. I'd written for like most of the alternate weeklies, but writing for Maclean's was pretty posh. And I realized very quickly that I could talk to anybody I wanted to, because I could just say, "Hi, I'm Mark. I'm phoning from Maclean's," and suddenly I could talk to politicians. I could talk to celebrities. Like when I was doing Maclean's story. So that, who's the guy to talk to about orcas? Yeah. It's Paul Watson.
Yes.
So I called Paul Watson, you know, who at that time, man, I think he Sea Shepherd at the time. So it was post Greenpeace.
Left Green. Was he? Did he leave Greenpeace at that point?
I'm not sure what the math was, but I'm pretty sure he was running the Sea Shepherd at that time.
Gotcha.
Because he left Greenpeace when I was pretty young.
Yeah.
But I asked him about orcas, captivity, Vancouver Aquarium. And at the time, captivity was so not his issue. Right? Like he's become more passionate about it now. But at the time, he's like, really, wild whale sort of thing. I'm really not your guy. But did you know the Vancouver Aquarium was the first place ever to capture and display an orca?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, how do I not know that? And then he said, did you know they harpooned that orca? I was like, that is amazing. How do I not know that?
Yeah.
And I did two things that broke. I mean, I was a professional freelancer. I made my living writing for newspapers and magazines, doing freelance stories. And I did two things freelancers do not do. One, I have no idea why. For the life of me, I still don't know why decades later, but I decided that the story of this orca in captivity was for me. It wasn't for Maclean's.
Okay.
I don't know why I did that. I was just like, no, I'm not wasting this in this write-up on cetaceans in captivity. And I went, I need to know more about this. And that was the other thing that I did that freelancers do not do. I decided I was going to look into this with nobody paying me for it.
Yeah,
and
this is just a passion project at this point.
I was just like, I need to know more about this. And so I tracked down Dr. Murray Newman, who at that time had been retired from the Vancouver Aquarium for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, would you talk to me about this orca you captured? And he's like, yeah, it was an accident. The orca was named Moby Doll. But the first thing he does is he breaks open this book from 1964, the same year that they accidentally caught Moby. And he reads me this passage, and I'm going to badly paraphrase this. There was a period I could have done this dead on. But basically it was lions, tigers, and bears are fierce creatures, but far more dangerous, far more ferocious than any of these is the dreaded killer whale. And
oh, wow.
This was written by the top whale expert in the U.S. Wow. And Murray Newman, as I found out later, studied trout. His PhD thesis was trout. So he talked about learning more about orcas, and he's like, and anybody he talked to and said, you don't go near them. They will kill you. You get anywhere near an orca. Anywhere near a killer whale. Nobody was using the term orca.
No, it was all killer whale.
All killer whale. So you get anywhere near one of these killer whales, it will kill you. There were people who were afraid that they would approach them on land. That if they got too close to the shore, the killer whale was going to jump up. Like, as scary as as scary as people thought sharks were after Jaws, that's how scary everybody seemed to think these orcas were back in the mid 60s. Blew my freaking mind. And then the more I learned about it, the more I went, oh my God, I've stumbled onto a real life science fiction story. Now, science fiction is my thing. I found the story of first contact with an alien creature. And the other thing that I thought was this was the Free Willy era. So nobody wanted to hear a story about an orca in captivity, where it wasn't, this is monstrous. I'm like, no, this was science happening in real time. This was discovery in real time. And I was obsessed with telling the story. I can't stress enough, I was having almost none of my pitches rejected at this time. I was like winning magazine awards on a regular basis, newspaper awards. I could not get anyone to let me write about this story.
Really? Nobody was interested?
No, it was a history piece. I was dealing with a guy who I think was already in his 70s. He was nobody was into it at all. I could not sell it to anyone.
Were you surprised by that?
Yeah.
Because you were so interested.
I started going to people that I knew who made documentary films, and I went, you should do this. I should do this, because I thought, I'm not capable of this. I don't know how to make a documentary. And they were like, well, you're the one who's passionate about it. Let's pitch it. I had an Academy Award-winning documentary maker try and pitch it as a documentary. I had an Emmy Award-winning documentary maker. And they just kept running into, it's not Free Willy. The story everybody wanted was...
People wanted Free Willy.
They wanted Free Willy. They didn't want this history piece. And this is the third thing I did as a freelancer that there's no other story that I've ever stuck with like this. I kept trying to give it away because I kept saying somebody has to interview these key people because they're all really old. And they just have to get the story. Lose that
history. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what I found out was that all of the interviews that were done with him all started from, except for the stuff in the 60s, everything started from the premise of how could you do this horrible thing? Yeah. And they left out the context of in 1964, fishermen were shooting these orcas on sight. We had a machine gun turret set up off the coast of Campbell River to slaughter killer whales. So this was the world in 1964. Yeah. And the idea that essentially, really in days of the time Moby Doll was accidentally captured, this shifted, blew my mind. So I chased after this story. Like, I looked this up. I actually reached out to Moby Dick scholars who went, they figure Ahab chased Moby Doll. Right. Or, sorry, Ahab chased Moby Dick for 3 years max.
Right.
I chased Moby Doll for freaking decades before anybody would talk to me, because I finally got Murray Newman to say, I'll let you tell the story. Or sorry, other way around. I finally figured out how I could do the interviews. I didn't know who I was going to do them for, but I made a different movie. I made a feature film called The Green Chain. I went, oh, cameras aren't that scary. And I asked the cameraman, I said, what would it cost if I could just book you for one day? I want to interview these old guys. I have no idea what I want to do with it, but I just need to interview with them, just so that I can sleep at night. I know I need to know if somebody has protected this story,
right?
And somebody's asked some stories in context. And I get the cameraman. He's a documentary guy who's won awards, and I'm so psyched. And Murray Newman said, "You know what? Every time I've opened my mouth about Moby Doll, somebody calls me a monster. I'm never talking about it again."
No.
Yeah. So I finally figured out how to do this.
Yeah.
And this is where I cross into Ahab territory, because at this point, I am sending Murray Newman Christmas cards.
Right.
He is sending
Building that relationship.
He is sending me articles about diving. He's like, Mark, I will talk to you about anything in my entire career, not Moby Doll. And finally, there's a symposium on Saturna Island celebrating the legacy of Moby Doll. It's like closing in the 50th anniversary. And Newman says, you know what? We'll do this. Let's do this. And so he invites me over to his house. And you can tell, and this is a decade on easily since when I first met him. So he's long since retired. And he invites me over to his house. And thank God, I had a producer who was a friend who went, you know what? I'm going to send a couple cameras with you. Let's see what happens. My wife came with a GoPro. Like we had cameras everywhere because what he did was he said, you know what? I think you should talk to everybody. So I show up and I arrive and he went, from 9 to 10 o'clock, you will speak with me. From 10 o'clock to 11 p.m., you will speak to Dr. Pat McGeer, who was the neuroscientist, who was the scientist in the expedition. From 11, you will talk to the chief veterinarian from the Vancouver. He lined up everything. From noon to 1, we will have lunch. We are having tuna fish sandwiches and cookies.
It was like a full day conference kind of thing for you.
Oh, he laid out an entire symposium just for me with a ton of guests.
Wow.
And I came out of there going, oh my God, this is amazing. So I wrote a story for The Walrus, which was nominated for a science award for science writing. And somewhere awesome. My high school science teacher, if he wasn't dead, this killed him. If he was dead, he rolled over in his grave. Because here's my science background. And my science background is really weird. Because my lab partner in Chem 11, Dr. Robert Hogg, is one of the top AIDS researchers out there. Teaches at SFU now, taught at, and I almost ruined his science career because I would make jokes. We would get projects. I would make jokes on them. And the chem teacher actually gave me a grade you cannot get anymore called a conditional pass. And the condition was I never set foot in another science classroom. Right. So that was my science background up until suddenly I'm in the middle of this. So somewhere that science teacher's like, no, you're nominated for best science article in Canada. And then I did a story called The Killer Whale That Changed the World for CBC Radio for Ideas. And that won a Webster Award. And the night of the Webster Awards, and I'd pitched this to publishers for 20 something years. Night of the Webster Awards, a publisher came up and went, have you ever thought of doing a book? I'm like, yeah.
You should be like, no.
And wrote the book, and somebody that you will have heard of, and I'm hoping your listeners are aware of, Eric Hoyt was kind enough to read the book and blew
Eric Hoyt's like, one of the biggest, marine mammal scientists in the world.
The guy.
He's the guy, yeah.
Yeah. So he offers to read the book, and he gets back to me, and he said, I love it. I've only got one suggestion. What's that? He said, not the killer whale that changed the world. The killer whale who changed the world.
So not
my
publishers.
Yeah, my publishers went for it. I mean, even though we'd started publicizing, even though the CBC thing had won a major award, they're like, we'll go with that. I will be forever grateful to Eric Hoyt for that suggestion, because that set me down an entire path of referring to animals as who, not what, he, she, and they, not it, and realizing that's what Dr. Jane Goodall is into, and, Franz de Waal and Anthropo Nile became an obsession of mine. So that's where all that went. And then what happened, going back to the books, Orca Publishing, which ironically does not publish a lot of books about orcas, reached out to me, and they're one of the top kids publishers in Canada. And I'd known the publisher from my other life where I published funny stuff. Yeah. And she said, would you be interested in doing a kid's book of the killer whale who changed the world? And I went, it's too depressing a story. I mean, the whale, Moby dies after being harpooned. It is a sad freaking story. Like, for sure. I do believe that whale changed the world, but it's a sad story. And I said, could I just do a story about all the amazing things I've learned about orcas since being thrown into this world? And she went, absolutely. And that became Orcas Everywhere. And then I had I used to do a lot of interviews around movies. I covered the Toronto Film Festival for 20 years for the Georgia Strait in Vancouver, sometimes
Gotcha.
for Vancouver Sun. And one of the people I met, actually, I'd met him when my movie about forests, which was fictional, was touring. I met Rob Stewart, who made the movie Sharkwater.
Yeah.
And we kind of became friends. And so I introduced his movies at film festivals,
Nice.
and we hung out a bit. And he was actually set to write a blurb for The Killer Whale Who Changed the World and be one of my first guests on Scanna. And then he passed away in his accident.
Yeah.
And so I decided that the way to honor him on Scanna and part of my podcast was to run some of the interviews I'd done with him over the years, even though they were never intended as audio. And I did that. And somebody working on his posthumous movie reached out and went, I had no idea that you were so into him. Would you be willing to work on promoting his movie to NGOs and basically talking about the work politically? Would you be game to reach out and go, these are the things that we would like to see happen to help sharks? I was like, oh, this is like, so
yeah.
To me, one of the best things that ever happened during the podcast was being invited to do that.
Yeah.
And the Orcas Everywhere, the first book for orcas, also turned into a baby book, Big Whale, Small World, and a picture book, Orcas at Salish Sea. And Orca was really happy and said, would you like to do something else? I went, I don't really know about anything else. And then I went, you know what? I would like to write the book about sharks that Rob should have written. So and I reached out before saying yes. I reached out to the Sharkwater Foundation. I went, do you think Rob's parents will be cool with this? Would you guys be cool with this? And so Rob's parents gave me their blessing.
Nice.
The Sharkwater Foundation gave me their blessing and access to their photos.
Oh,
so
wow.
I had all of these amazing photos. And I also did a shark baby book, which was specifically because I wanted to get across that sharks are awesome, not scary.
Yeah.
Right? And then, one sec. And then Orca said, so what else are you going to do? I'm like, I got nothing. This isn't my world. I'm like a comedy writer. I write plays, man. And my wife, Rain, who basically is responsible for me having the podcast, she did the tech and said, yeah, if you do the podcast, I'll do the tech. I went, okay. Said, you should do octopuses because octopuses are awesome. And so they're so amazing. And so I came at octopuses completely cold, beyond always, whenever I'd gone to an aquarium as a kid, I would just obsess over watching them.
Of course.
Because how do you not?
Yeah.
Right. But I came at their world completely cold. And again, that's where the podcast was a gift. Because I went, oh, I will just interview octopus experts and I'll get them to tell me things. So I interviewed Simon Montgomery and I interviewed Dana Stoff and just went, okay, tell me cool octopus things that kids would want to know. And I went to a local elementary school and went, right. What do you know? What do you want to know? Yeah. And so that was
just kind of fueled it all for you, right?
Yeah, but that was just pure research and fun, right? But again, it's very odd, sort of if like my career or my life has taken a lot of odd turns. I'm pretty sure no one could have predicted that 2015 I was going to write a book about orcas, and 2025 that this is still where I'd be playing.
Yeah,
I would still be talking about orcas.
Still talking about the science.
Oh yeah, my students. I teach courses in writing and pop culture and intro to fine arts, and my students are like, "You're the whale guy, right?" It's like my classes are on the Marvel. Like, I teach a storytelling course built around the Marvel universe, a storytelling course built around the DC universe. I'm like, but you're the whale guy, right?
You're the whale guy.
Yeah.
Now you got to switch your storytelling courses. You got to switch it to more of, of like ocean stuff. Octopus.
I try. I try. In my intro to fine arts, I'm just like, yeah, I'm just like, yeah, we're going to talk about whales now. And like, if I let my students ask me questions, they now go, tell us more about sharks. But
Mm.
like, and I'll talk about like the studies on lemon sharks and friendship.
Yeah.
Like, what are the most, like, what are the things that are most shocking to people? And that's what I go to. Like, it's the stuff you cover, man.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's why I love your podcast. Like,
Yeah.
because you cover all of the stuff that's just unexpected, right?
Yeah.
That sort of breaks the way we think things are.
Well, and I think that's the thing is when you take all this information, it's one of the reasons why I do the podcast, and you bring on people who you may or may not have heard of at some point in time, and you talk about the cool projects that like there are so many cool things and research and conservation projects and impacts and channels. Like I just did an interview just before this on, there's a guy who's in Australia who started an organization because he saw the Great Barrier Reef bleach 10 years ago, and he wasn't happy about that. They needed more data. So he came up with a way to create an AI and use citizen scientists to basically, determine and get more data just in terms of like 3 categories of reefs. And so now it's an app where you can actually just go and use the AI, and you just need citizen scientists to say, yes, this is rubble, or yes, this is a branching coral, or yes, this is a boulder coral, or whatever. And that information goes to a university and they put that into a model. Like,
Oh, I love
how
that.
do you come up with this kind of stuff? And you don't do it until you start reaching out to people, or they reach out to you. And then you start talking to them about this kind of work. Right. And you never know who it's going to inspire. Like, just like he was in the Netherlands at the time, where hearing about the Great Barrier Reef, he was originally from Australia, moves back and is like, yes, like I'm going to do something about this because I have to, like that's an incredible story that needs to be told.
I've met students who've gone into marine science because they read The Killer Whale Who Changed the World. That blows my mind.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And you never know who they might become. You never know what they might accomplish, and like you've done, like for when you write, what do you write for? Like when you write a book, any of the books that you've written in your past, right? How many books have you written?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not being cute. I really don't know.
No. And think about countless articles, right? Like countless articles.
Yeah. Oh, thousands of articles.
Right. Thousands of articles. So when you write a piece, whether it's an article or a book or whatever, like overall, like what are you trying to accomplish at that point?
I'm trying to share whatever I found that I think is amazing, right? Like
okay.
Whatever I'm like whatever I think people should know this. Like the shark book just kind of kicks off going, sharks do not want to eat you. If you read no further, this is all you need to know.
That's all you need to know.
Right? Like you can just stop the book now. Sharks don't want to eat you. Right?
I love that.
With the octopus book, I so wanted to get across how amazing they are, how intelligent they are. And with orcas, for lack of a better word, how human they are. Yeah. Right? Like the gift to me of not being a scientist is that I came at this world having no clue that anthropomorphism was a thing. I did not even know that term. So, and I lucked out because one of the first scientists who really made time for me was Lance Barrett Leonard from the Vancouver Aquarium. And his life has been dealing with orca behavior. And I think I caught him on just the right day, because when I was asking him a question, he said, you know what? I'm really tired of apologizing for anthropomorphizing. He said, I don't know what else to say beyond these animals have the same type of emotions we do.
Yeah.
Right. And I caught him on, I really do think it was like just the right day. And Rain asked him a question that became kind of a go-to for me in all of my work since, which was, she said, do you think whales are psychic? Because he was talking about where these orcas show up. And he didn't love the word.
Of course.
But he went, first day I show up in Vancouver and I'm about to dedicate my life to these orcas. And I'm on a kayak and I'm suddenly surrounded by orcas. And I started asking the question a little bit differently. And I started basically asking people who've devoted their lives to orcas, tell me your impossible story. Tell me the story that you are uncomfortable sharing because it just sounds fictionally implausible. Tell me your fictionally implausible orca story. And they all have one. And they all have multiples. And the one that
Right.
really blew my mind, I now have multiples. And the one that just completely blew my mind was Alexandra Morton talking about these orcas surrounding her when her boat was lost in the fog, and the orcas leading her back to safety.
Hmm.
And this pod she was studying. And the reason that it blew my mind was I went, I think Ken Balcom told me that story a few
The same
months ago.
story.
And Ken Balcom, Center for Whale Researcher, same thing, where his boat was lost and a group of orcas, a pod of orcas, surrounded him and took him to safety. I'm like, this isn't possible. I actually heard the story and I couldn't even connect it to. No, I must be mixing it up. Ken must not have told me this. I'm like, yeah, he did. And in both cases, they said the same thing. This happened once. This happened exactly once. They were in trouble. The orca stuck with them. And I look and I put a chapter about all of these weird things
Yeah.
in orcas everywhere. And the first time I read this chapter, I'm on Saturna Island. I'd spent an entire summer on Saturna Island because Saturna Island was where Moby Dick was captured.
Right.
And somebody basically gifted me their place on Saturna Island for a very small fee so I could write the book on Saturna Island. Never managed to see an orca the whole time I'm on Saturna Island there. And so Rain and I are there the whole summer. So I'm back. They want me to do a reading in the park where Moby was harpooned. And this is just after Tahlequah had carried her dead daughter for 17 days. And I had decided, I had not told anybody this, but I decided I could no longer do this. It was just too sad.
Yeah.
I was just like, because it's hard for people to get to now. You hear the Southern residents, and they're no longer called the Southern residents. They're called the critically endangered Southern residents.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I jumped onto this story, when I first told the story of the killer whale who changed the world, it was a phenomenal story of a recovery, of the population have recovered. And everybody I talked to was excited and enthusiastic and talking about the resilience of nature. I didn't talk to a single sad person. They were all like, oh my God, isn't this amazing? And then they started to freaking die.
Mm-hmm.
And I was making a movie called The 100-Year-Old Whale. I can share you a link to this one because it's up everywhere now. Made a movie with Rain called The 100-Year-Old Whale and about Granny. But I thought, we're going to put out that movie and I'm going to put out this book and then I am done because this is just too sad.
Yeah, it's
and
hard.
I'm standing there and I'm about to read from this chapter from this book that is unpublished and somebody shouts whale. And suddenly all the people are there for the reading. We race to the side of the cliff and there is J-Pod, including Tahlequah, freaking dancing. Like, I don't know how else you want to put it, but they are just splashing everywhere.
Having a good
I
time.
got it. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm yours.
Yeah.
I don't get to quit. I'm yours.
Right. That's insane. Like
Yeah.
the timing, like.
Oh, I absolutely decided I was done. I was absolutely sure I was done. And J-Pod shows up. And when I post this on Facebook, the number of people said they showed up for you, which sounds utterly crazy until
impossible.
you go back to Eric Hoyt's work, where he goes, orcas show up for the people who need them.
Yeah.
And this is in Orca. And Murray Newman, back the first time I saw the word psychic mentioned was Murray Newman saying, these orcas must be psychic. They've never avoided Saturna Island before. And here we are, we've been here all summer, and it's like they know we've got a harpoon. When the machine gun was set up at Campbell River, the orcas went nowhere near Campbell River that entire summer.
They knew already.
So how does that happen? Right? Like that's where I've just become totally obsessed. Is like, well, how does that happen?
It's unreal too. Like, and, you hear these, as you say, impossible stories, and you just say, how can they show up like this each and every time? How can they help guide people to safety? How can they show up in emotional moments where you just, they've been going through a hard time. You followed them for decades. And then all of a sudden they show up when you need them. And like when you're like, I'm not sure I can do this anymore. Like, this is it. after this. And they're like, no, you still have a job to do. You need to speak for us, and we're going to be here for you when you need it. It's weird because, as a scientist, you're just like, this doesn't happen. It's like, this is not a thing, but when you look at the complexity and emotionality, I guess, of these whales, these orcas, I feel like you're constantly surprised, as a, general, we're constantly surprised by what they can accomplish. Right. And you just think about the last 40 years what we've put them through as humans. And you just like, they keep showing up for us, yet, humans keep doing this to them. And it's like, at what point are we going to learn, that we need to do better for these animals?
I mean, I go with Ken Balcom on Tellico was trying to tell us something, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, like, to me, the story just told me that's not even our craziest orca story, right? Like, I had sold a movie called The 100-Year-Old Whale. I had assumed there was a ton of footage of Granny out there because she's really old, whether she was 100 or not.
She's got to be around everywhere.
Really old. Yeah. And so what happens is Rain and I are like out, we're out hanging around downtown Victoria, and there's a particular whale watching company that works with a lot of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, works with a lot of scientists, a lot of unique people. And the guy who runs it said, you know what? If we see Granny, if we see her, we will take you out. And we have this great conversation. He said, you just need to know she's mostly hanging out with this other orca named Onyx from L-Pod. They are not being spotted very often. They're not being spotted with J-Pod. So no idea if we'll be able to help you up this summer.
Yeah.
But if it happens, we'll call. An hour later, he calls and says, hi, how I said we haven't seen Granny? Granny just showed up, and she's hanging out by one of our whale watching boats. How fast can you get down to Fisherman's Wharf? And next thing I know, Rain has a new camera she's never used. Because this is not supposed to be for the film. This is just a camera she was out playing with that day.
Right.
And he said, you know what? I'm going to take you out because you may never get another chance. So Brett, who runs this company, Eagle Wing, Clint, who's this amazing photographer, Rain and I get on a boat. I'd assumed he was getting us on a whale watching boat. He was just getting us on his boat so we could see Granny. Because he said, Granny's story is important. I will help you tell this story. So we race out there. And the best way to get it across was the people on the whale watching boat who they had left there so that we could catch them. So they would not lose sight of Granny. When they got back to shore, they were asked how the shore was. They said, oh, it was great. But then the other boat showed up, and it was amazing. And what happens is we show up, Rain points her camera, and if you've ever been out looking for orcas with a camera, you know that they're like, oh, camera? Yeah.
We're
I'm
shy.
going to be on the other side. Wherever you point that camera, good luck getting
I might be right behind you, but you won't know.
Yeah. Good luck getting my freaking tail. No. The Granny goes, oh, hey, Rain, I'm going to tail slap for you. Wow. And then a moment later, it's like, hey, Rain, I think I'm going to jump out. I'm going to spy hop for you. And then we're out at, if you know about films, magic hour is when the sun just goes orange and purple, right?
Yeah.
We are out at magic hour. Pretty much the entirety of J-Pod, except for Granny, is behind the boat, frolicking, like almost right behind us. Like we're parked. We're not moving. They're coming towards.
They're coming towards you guys.
They're like, hey, we're ready for a close-up. Just
get that camera ready.
And I actually said to Rain, I said, look, I don't care if the orcas behind us start to hula. I said, Granny was over there. Just point your camera over there.
Yeah, get Granny as much as possible.
And the next thing we know, Granny does this phenomenal, perfect freaking breach. Does this arc out of the water. Rain catches it. Just to make sure she didn't miss it, she does it a second time.
Jesus.
And if you listen to the entire tape, like if you could hear the whole audio, you can hear the guy who has been running these whale watching tours and the photographer has been out with him for decades.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's Granny. Like they sound like 4-year-old girls. And then you hear me muttering going, please tell me you got the shot. Please tell me you got the shot. please tell me you're on the show. And like the camera did not reset in time to get the second breach because they were so fast.
Wow.
And I said to them, and I turned to the guys and I said, you must have seen this dozens of times.
Yeah.
And they looked and went, no, 5 times ever. We've seen Granny breach 5 times ever. Those were 2 of them. Jesus. And then I reached out to the Center for Whale Research. Decades. They've been out there for decades. And I reached out to the Center for Whale Research and went, can we please get all of your footage of Granny? And they're like, oh, we've got no footage of Granny. And what do you mean with this? We got some stills. But
but no.
And I started putting out calls for footage of Granny. If we had known there was no footage of Granny, we couldn't have made the movie. Our producer wouldn't have approved it. So this one fluky day, we get the footage that ends our movie. That if we won a whole bunch of awards for that movie, we won awards because Granny showed up for her close-up. A few days later, Rain goes out without me. Just one of the great regrets of my life was I was like, no, I've got some deadlines. And a superpod shows up. Again, the boat is freaking parked. And the superpod just goes, excuse me, she needs some photos for her movie. So we've got 70 orcas here. And we better, we hear you're making a movie.
We want to be in. Granny told us.
We would all like to, we can't just let Granny be in. We'd all like to be in the movie.
Yeah.
So Rain was supposed to be getting a bit of extra footage for our movie. And instead, she shot half the film.
One trip.
In these 2 days. Because she's got the superpod and she came back just in tears going, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah.
Right. And again, superpods are wild and scientifically implausible because they almost always seem to coincide with births and deaths.
Yeah.
And sciencey scientists are very uncomfortable and just keep going, it's a coincidence. I'm like, no, I read my Sherlock Holmes. Once is a coincidence. 3 times is evidence.
No,
right?
Exactly.
50 times, I don't get how you don't go in some way, shape, or form we do not understand. They are sharing information that is saying it's superpod time, guys. We've got a celebration or we've got a grief and
unreal.
Yeah.
These like it's really interesting to see like you telling these stories, and then you see on like I watch TikTok incessantly. I'm addicted, and I see a number of creators on there that are scientists, and they talk about orcas and they work for organizations around orcas or they live in BC. Yeah. And I'll tell you, when they show their footage of them going out just to see them, like they hear the orcas are in or they're close or I don't know if there's like a network of people sighting them. And then people you see all these creators just go. And a lot of times they're just showing the camera, they may have music in the background. Sometimes they don't, but they show themselves watching them. And it's like, it's emotional. It's super emotional for these professionals who see them often, right? Like they go out whenever they can and have studied them or have, researched them. And when they see them in person, it's like this uncontrollable human emotion to get emotional, whether it's happiness, whether it's happy tears or sad tears or whatever that might be. No matter how many times people live out there and how many times you see them, every time seems to be like it hits that emotional strings.
It was amazing to me because we really didn't know how our documentary was going to spin. So one of the questions that I asked non-scientists, I asked scientists this as well. Can you tell me about the first time you saw a whale? And the number of times I heard the word magic. Like if I was just categorizing the words that came up, magic and magical just were the go-tos. Yeah. Right. Just there's something just overwhelming about being out there with. I just realized we're talking entirely about the wrong marine. Yeah,
but it doesn't matter. This is good because I think people don't realize we see them and we get to see them a lot online and on TV and in documentaries. I feel like it should be on everybody's bucket list to go whale, to go orca watching. It's definitely on mine. I've never seen an orca in the wild. I know it's something that I want to do. It's definitely on my bucket list. and it's just I feel like it's just something just seeing professionals who see them often react every time the same way. It's a very different thing, and I don't know what it is about these orcas that do it, but they're just and you've described it, just like their timing, their ability to provide like good moments at the right time when you just need it. And other times the frustration of them not showing up when you go out and you're looking for them. You got the big camera out and everything. But I just love that. But it just goes to show that it can get someone like yourself who's not a scientist, who doesn't study them, but is somebody who loves to write and, tell stories. And there's a number of people, you mentioned Alexandra Morton, who loves to tell stories about these orcas.
Yeah.
Very good storyteller in her own right. And you just sitting there and you're just like, I'm glad that it's not just a scientist that's writing about these, and of course they've affected every people other than scientists as well. But it's just so nice to see, someone who, you and Ray and your wife, like to be like, we want to share their stories, like the way they affected us. We need their stories to go, because obviously, critically endangered southern resident orca population. You have the northern orca population, which they're doing okay, but they're not the best. You have a transient population, which we still don't know too much about, and then you have another population out even further, which we still don't like. We're just seems like we're
the offshores are just weird.
They're weird,
like,
right?
They're just out there. They're eating sharks, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that they were identified by their lousy teeth, that's just awesome.
Exactly. So it's just such a it's such a moment where I did want to cover, because obviously you've dedicated a big part of your life to orcas, and it's part of your story in writing about science. I think it's amazing. But like as you pivot towards different, going to sharks and other, big whales, small world, like that type of work, and now Octopus Ocean. When you move, and obviously, Sharks Forever, it had a bit different story, definitely had that emotional connection for you, and, for Rob and his family and his legacy. The other books, like, what makes it, like, obviously people suggest it, but what makes, like, is there an emotional tie that you have to Octopus? Like, obviously whales you do, but like, what is that tie to Octopus that you have?
Well, with Octopus, I was like, we just come out of the pandemic, and I had read Cy Montgomery's amazing book where she went and hung out with octopuses. And the Shaw Center for the Salish Sea in Sydney, which is like 30 minutes from my house. And I said, are you guys cool with me just coming out and watching people watch your octopuses? Right? So I just watched kids and adults watching mostly this octopus named Storm. And after
it was a Pacific Great, like one of those great Pacific
giant Pacific octopus. And finally, it's really interesting. They're very careful with who they let meet their octopuses there, because they return them. They've got a really interesting policy where they're like, you know what? We are in the center of where these guys live, so we're only going to keep them 6 months.
Right.
And Storm had a really interesting story, because she was basically captured and was en route to, I think it was Iceland, where she would have spent her entire life in captivity. And a storm kept her from flying out to Iceland. And instead of short term at the Salish Sea Center, they went, you know what, we can just find another octopus. So why doesn't she just stay with you? And then she was supposed to be returned. I think she stayed with them longer than any other octopus, because we had fires and they could not get her home. And so her story became a wild story in terms of the terrible weather effects we have here now, the fact that we have a fire season here now, right? Like, and they were kind enough to let me put a hand into Storm's tank right before she left. Right. And Storm reached out and shook my hand. I'm like, yeah, that's my opening. That's like, I knew. I actually, as soon as I left, I'm like, I went to a cafe right around the corner and I wrote the introductory chapter. And I went, yeah, I've just met
just right then and there.
Yeah, it's just like, I shook hands with an octopus. Everything else in the entire book may change. This is my opening.
Because it was so, because you had that connection.
Right? Yeah.
Like that had to be it, because that was the inspiration right at that connection.
Yeah, she reached out. She said, hey, decided I was nowhere near as interesting as the crab she was eating. But, and Did she recognize me as the guy who'd been watching her off and on for 6 months? Probably, because they know stuff, right? Like story after story that I read about octopuses and interview after interview was like, yeah, they recognize keepers. They recognize certain people. And I mean, running into stories about animals with sense of humor, that's just weird, right? Like just going, yeah, they spray somebody because they want to. Or, one of the wildest stories really stuck with me was Chester the false killer whale at the Vancouver Aquarium. And I asked, this is a false killer whale who washed up, if I remember correctly, on the beach. I've never written about Chester, but washed up on the beach, was taken in, and they didn't know which family Chester belonged to, and was basically doing medical rehab for all that time. Chester would have learned how to be a false killer whale, right? It's very hard to explain to people, like, no, these animals learn their own language. They learn their culture. This is
even in their own dialect for each pod. Like it's differences, right? Yeah.
So I said, I asked what seemed like a really normal question. I said, what's Chester like? And the person who was showing us around the aquarium went, and wasn't sure what to say. And finally went, kind of an asshole. Like, what? Yeah, that was I was like, what?
Excuse
me. And they said, Chester has this game and has discovered that when there's a lot of people around, especially kids, Chester will sink like a stone to the bottom of his tank and wait till people scream and cry and then pop back up and go, I'm fine. They said they dubbed it they had dubbed it the resurrection game because Chester was clearly messing. Cruel. Yeah, Chester was clearly messing with the people. I'm like, and what stuck with me about that was the idea that the people who were there were very, like, they weren't comfortable saying Chester had a personality, but they admitted Chester had a personality, right? And the idea of the personalities of these animals, the fact that every single person I've spoken to who's an octopus expert is like, oh yeah, they're so different. And again, shark people are like, oh yeah, I've met shy sharks. I've met friendly sharks. Like, that's like trying to get across they're individuals.
Well, Mark, I have I did the Toronto Zoo podcast for a long time. I hosted it and I got to talk to zookeepers. And one of the things that we had a special was like stories from the zookeepers, and they would talk about their silverback gorillas and they would talk about their personalities. There was one, I think it was like Josephine's daughter. I forget her name. She used to love hats. She used to see people wear hats. So they gave her hats and she would try them on in a mirror and see how she looked. Like a massive silverback gorilla would try on a hat, and I mean sun hats, ball caps, like everything she would see, and then she'd be like, "Ooh, that looks interesting," and they would give her old hats, and then she would try them on.
Cool.
And their troop leader, big silverback, scary, like typical, like you do not want to mess. This guy will rip off your arms in a second if he really wanted to. Never did, of course. He was very gentle. He was afraid of frogs. Okay. Like, think about it. Like imagine you see, and this is the keeper said this. They saw one time there was a frog in their enclosure, and all these gorillas were surrounding this frog, and you see Charles just kind of like flick it and like what, and it would jump, and they'd all like back up. Like these massive troops of like massive gorillas, a troop of massive gorillas just would like be afraid. And there was one time, and I'll tell this story quick because I know this interview is about you. There's one time where they were coming out of their nightly enclosure, like their bed area.
Yeah.
And they came out and Charles stopped all of them and they put them all back into their bed area and he wouldn't come out. And they're like, what is going on? And they looked around. There was a tree frog in the back corner and he saw it. And he wouldn't let any of them out. So he was so afraid of this to the point where I was out there with my daughter and we went to watch. She wants to be a wildlife biologist, so we're watching all these animals. And I'm telling her about all these different animals and the different characteristics of each one. And you see, like, this is an outdoor enclosure. And there's like, it's a cage, obviously reinforced cage. And you get to see these gorillas, like, you're not that far, but you can see them. And they're just amazing. There's one area of the cage that had like a little cutout. It would look like it was reinforced with something else because like maybe the enclosure broke or something like that. But it looked like it was fixed. And on there was a picture of a frog. like right dead smack in the middle of that area that was
my.
fixed. It was a picture of a frog. And do you think the gorillas went close to it? When they went near it, they would run to skirt by it so they could get rid of it. They wouldn't run anywhere else, but they would walk nice and slow. And then they would like run like they were afraid because there was a frog on there.
That is
like
cool.
You're telling me all these.
I love that so much.
I completely agree. They all have their different personalities. They all have their things. Some of them are devious. Some of them are tricksters. Some of them are fun and cuddly, and they're just amazing to watch. And it's phenomenal to see these characteristics. And I'm sure if you see orcas in the wild or octopus in the wild, I mean, My Octopus Teacher won a Grammy or not Grammy, but an Academy Award for that movie because you saw the personality of an octopus.
Well, that was one of the things that came up when I was hanging out at the Center for Salish Sea was, oh my God, everybody had seen that movie. So it was pretty cool when Craig Foster read Octopus Ocean and went, yeah, sure, I'll write you a nice blurb. And did a bit of a fact check, and I'm like, yeah, awesome.
Nice.
And, like, okay, I feel very official now.
I love it. So for what do you want people to get out of Octopus Ocean?
With Octopus Ocean, I want to get across that we're not the only, with so many of these now, that we're not the only intelligent animals on this planet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just the more I learn, the more it's like, oh, wow, the whole human exceptionalism thing makes no sense at all. Because again, coming at this without a science background, I started by saying, okay, so walk me through the whole food chain concept. Like, walk me through why we're considered the best and the coolest animal on Earth. And I had just, like, for real, I had just assumed there was a scientific basis to this. I had just assumed somebody's going to say, well, humans can do this and this and this. And I would hear all this stuff. So it's like, man, the tool maker. Yeah, crows do that. You can just break down. Like, orcas know how to make nets with bubbles. Yeah. We can't, like, that's cool. Right? Yeah. And crows know how to make keys. And you just start to go through the animals like, okay, that doesn't hold up. And I mean, one of the gifts of being a sessional instructor at the University of Victoria was that I had access to like amazing students who study science. And for orcas everywhere, I was basically a history prof who's a friend of mine who was also doing a book on orcas. Basically, I have like a bunch of extra hours with my master's student. Do you want her to help you do research? And she knows marine biology. And I would just go, okay, Lily, walk me through this. I said, so I'm not asking a really dumb question to a scientist. I'm going to ask the dumb questions to you.
Yeah.
Because I have not taken first year marine biology. Right. So I would ask questions, especially around human exceptionalism, basically, which not a term that I knew when I started this, all these years ago. And I kept thinking I would find a science behind it. And what I found was this was the one place science really was deferring to religion and pretending there was science behind it, but really going, yeah, we're the only ones who have language, and let's define language to make sure of that.
Right.
Let's make sure our definition of language excludes anything else that could conceivably be language. And
interesting
that we just kept moving the goalposts. And again, I came at this expecting there to be goalposts. I really did. I didn't come at this contrary. I came at this knowing nothing. Yeah. So I came at this going, what is this anthropomorphism thing you speak of? Why is it a thing in science? Walk me through this. And going, oh, so there's no scientific basis for this at all.
Right.
There's no, like, walk me through the science of why this is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And like my favorite was Franz de Waal talking me through tickle-induced vocalizations. Like, I'm sorry, if a 3-year-old sees a tickle-induced vocalization, they go, oh, the monkey's laughing. Yes, the monkey's laughing.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
but
exactly. Just a different term, same thing.
And with the orca book, I saw one scientist like wrap themselves in knots to come up with a term that basically made sure you did not. It may have been the sharks in France, and just made sure they have affiliates. Like, really? Yeah. And the big one for me was Tahlequah. because Teliqua just rocked my world. And
Yeah.
I so wanted to do another killer whale who changed the world, because she's the other one who did. And when I saw, I think it was the New York Times go, the orca appears to be grieving. And I thought, no, humans may appear to be grieving. I have seen humans at funerals where they were going, oh, I'm glad that person's in the box.
Right.
I'm so glad they're. I do not believe Talik was faking us out here. I do not believe she appears to be grieving. So how can we go, humans grieve? We know exactly that all human grief is legit, but we cannot know what is going on. No, you're trying way too hard to sound like
sometimes you just see the signs and you're just like, hold on a second here. Like,
well, and then you get into science,
like a sentimental version of this, and you can call it whatever you want, but it's very similar to what we do, right?
And then you get into science, which again was all new to me, right? And you get into science of mirror neurons and going, okay, so these orcas have and the apes have the exact same neurons that are referred to as the neurons that make us human. So the neurons that deal with complex emotions like grief, they've got them. So they've got the exact same neurons we do, but they don't have the same emotions.
So crazy. Crazy. I love it. I love this conversation. You and I could probably talk for hours on this, and
absolutely.
I'm sure we will have you back on to be able to talk more about your next book that you'll be writing. But this is awesome. If people want to get a hold of this copy, how would they do so?
Leiren-Young.com. The book's available everywhere you buy books. So all the books are. And Leiren-Young.com or Scana.org for the podcast. Look up Scana, Skana, and you get my podcast and you get my interview with Andrew, and Leiren-Young.com, and you can check the spelling out, but spell it however you want.
I'll post it in the show notes so they get access to it. Mark, this has been such a treat to have you on. Really appreciate it. It's always great to interview not only a fellow podcaster, but someone who writes, from a non-scientist point of view, writes science books and just gets it. Like, we get it, and it's so great, and I love the connection you have with the ocean and with the orcas, and I can't wait to go orca watching with you someday. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yes, please, and thank you so much for all of you do. I love your podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Thank you, Mark, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast and bringing the magic of storytelling, bringing the importance of connection to these animals, to orcas, to octopuses, to sharks, and to the people who protect them and work within them. Scientists have this bond. We have colleagues. They turn into friends. Some of them are colleagues. Some of them, you get criticism from them. They might be enemies, whatever that might be. But there's this ultimate connection that we all have. And it's not just scientists. It goes to ocean conservationists. It goes to storytellers. It goes to writers. It goes to filmmakers. We all have something in common in that we've connected with the ocean. We've connected with each other. And when we have this connection, we want to tell people stories. It's the connection that I have with a lot of the guests that I've had on. It's meeting them at conferences, meeting them online, and having them on the podcast and hearing them tell their stories gives me that connection, gives me that inspiration where after I leave this, after I've done this intro, because I'm doing this intro right after the interview, I leave my office and I'm just like, that was so much fun. I want to tell everybody about it. And I think it's, you want to do that. You want to pay tribute to the people that you interviewed, to the people that you're colleagues with, to the people who have had these extraordinary experiences, whether it be science, whether it be conservation, whether it be writing about them or creating a film about them. There is this incessant connection that we all share, and we all want to pay tribute to that. And to watch Mark pay tribute to his heroes, to Paul Watson, to Rob Stewart, to other podcasters and so forth. It's amazing to see that. It's just amazing to see that collaboration, that ability to tell those stories and feel that connection, and then pay tribute to the people by, telling other stories, their stories through books, through the eyes and visions of orcas, through other whales, through octopuses. It's just phenomenal, and I absolutely love it. There's a point where, Mark gets a little emotional telling with the story, and you can just see that he's so into it, that the connections that he's had with these orcas, the octopuses, the whales, the sharks, and the people who have helped them understand the material and tell those stories. It's just phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. It makes a great interview. It makes a great episode. Love to hear what you think of this episode. Go and go to my DMs on Instagram. DM me at How to Protect the Ocean. Let me know how you feel. And if you're watching this on YouTube, just let me know how you feel about this episode and that connection, and share a connection that you might have with the specific animal, specific species. I'd love to hear it. I'm going to put the links in to Mark Leiren-Young's website. I'm going to put it into how you can buy his book in the show notes. So check that out, and check in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank Mark, and I want to thank you for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.